This episode is brought to you by the Boneyard Huskies Club. The Boneyard Huskies Club empowers athletes while providing UConn fans with access to exclusive community, utility, and rewards. The Boneyard Huskies Club is excited to announce the next collection of student-athlete collectibles, which grant club membership privileges, will feature UConn men's basketball players and drop on January 9th, 2023. For more information, go to boneyardhuskiesclub.com. That's Huskies with a YZ at the end. boneyardhuskiesclub.com. All right, joining me, familiar face everyone knows him. It's Dave Borges of the Hearst Media. Dave, welcome to the podcast again.
Hey, good to be back. How's things, Jared?
Things are going great. I mean, it's if you're a UConn fan, what can be going wrong right now, right?
The men's basketball team looks really, really good. Really, really good. I mean, just nothing but impressed with the way they've played so far this season.
I want to start there. Going into this season, with the expectations you might have had for this team, did you think they'd be playing at this level this quickly into the season?
No, I didn't. I thought there were some legit questions on coming in, how well they'd mesh, how well they'd play. I certainly thought there might be a little more of a learning curve for Donovan Clingan. Certainly, despite the fact that he's a 7'2" kid who was the top, top 75 national recruit. Wondering whether the jump from CCC basketball to the Big East or to just the NCAA was going to be a big step for him. I figured he'd be good, but I didn't think he'd be this good. I look back, I think, even Jordan Hawkins, after kind of an up and down year last year, you wondered how consistently good he could be. I thought they had a potential to be a very good team. And I thought they'd, I had them ranked, I think, 22nd in my preseason AP poll. But I did not expect them to be arguably the best team in the country by mid-December.
What do you think has impressed you the most about this team as you've been following them and seeing them play, on a weekly basis here?
Yeah, there's so much. They're so well connected. They're just like one organism out there. Everyone's playing for each other. Guys, defensively swarming to the ball. People penetrate the lane, and there's 3 or 4 guys there to stop them, to block a shot, pick up a charge. I mean, you see Jordan Hawkins buying in, doing that. A guy whose defensive play had been questioned a little bit, but he's taken a bunch of charges already this year. Offensively, it's just a thing of beauty. It's how the spacing. Yeah. They have the 4 out with Adama. You see Adama has a lot more room to operate now with 4 shooters on the perimeter. So he's dominating inside, and then the passing, the sharing of the ball around the perimeter, and finding the open man, the lob dunks. It seems like it almost feels like when Donovan Clingan is out there, they could run that play every time because he's so damn big.
Yeah.
And he gets open on the pick and rolls, and it's really been a work of art. I mean, there's not too much to criticize. It's just everything is really, but really just the connectiveness of the entire team, I guess I would say, to sum it up.
If you're looking at this, and I feel like Dan Hurley now has to put on his Gino Auriemma hat a little bit, where you've beaten everyone by double digits so far this season. How do you find some things to pick at in some areas to improve? And I know it came across in some of the post-game quotes from the players the other day, where, they were being a little bit picky of different things throughout the game. Where do you see this team as having a spot or two where you'd like to see them improve heading into Big East play?
Yeah, I think you really do sound like you're nitpicking when you criticize this team at all. But obviously, no one's perfect. I mean, certainly some of the guard play, some of the play from Naheem Aline and Hassan Diarra. Aline, we saw a little bit of resurgence in the later minutes of that LIU game, so maybe that's a good sign for him moving forward. Hassan Diarra has struggled a bit offensively. Even Tristan Newton, as good as he's been as a point guard, he's certainly kind of been up and down with a few clunkers in there as well. So perhaps better guard play. I think maybe ball handling could be somewhat of concern against a team that really guards you, full court pressure type of situation. Although Iowa State kind of showed that, and UConn had no problem beating them, but I think of the teams like even a St. John's or a Marquette,
Yeah,
play that kind of real pressure defense could be, it could be a challenge because Andre Jackson's handling a lot of the point guard duties, and he's not. The team doesn't really have a kind of a classic point guard. I mean, Hassan Diarra might sort of be, but he's probably not quite at the level of in terms of as good a player as some of the other guys ahead of him. So, I'd say that the shooting. It's funny. Like I was talking to Bob Hurley Sr. Before the game the other day, and he's like, "Well, the 3-point shooting could be better," and it really hasn't been that bad. I think they're shooting like 37%, and Joey Calcaterra is shooting over 55%, and even Adama's knocking down a few here and there. So not a lot, but just got to stay sharp and be ready for these tough Big East road games ahead too.
You mentioned Joey there, and he's the guy I wanted to ask you about. I feel like he came into this season as one of those transfers who was a lot more under the radar. All the other transfers, Tristan Newton, had put up, some pretty big stats at East Carolina, Sandiara and Nahim Aline coming from Power 5 schools. And then you got Joey, and it seems like he's kind of, lit the court on fire this season so far. What have your thoughts been on him? Especially because I feel like the past couple games too, you've seen him do more than just shoot the three. Like he's been picking it up on defense. He's been taking the ball to the basket a little bit more. So what are your thoughts on him at this point so far?
Yeah, he's another one. I thought that he was going to be kind of maybe like the 10th guy in the team. And that's even kind of the general thought process I got from around the team, that he probably was, might not be a huge contributor, but he's been great. Like you said, I mean, the 3-point shooting is incredible, but I think he's shooting over 50% from the floor overall. He's taking the ball to the hole well, even a little more athletic than maybe he was rumored to be. I mean, but really, even the 3-point shooting, I mean, he never shot above 40% in his years at San Diego.
Yeah.
And he's just shooting the heck out of the ball now. So I wasn't even sure to expect how great a 3-point shooter he was going to be, but so far so good. We'll see if he can keep it up in the grind of the Big East. I mean, he's obviously played well against some good teams already, but the Big East season's a grind, and it's a different brand of basketball. We'll see if he can kind of keep up this consistent play, but so far he's shown no reason why he won't.
Can you see the performance from the freshmen, especially with Donovan and Alex? They've gotten off to some good starts here. I know you mentioned getting into Big East play. Now there's going to be a little bit more tape on these guys, that the teams are going to be able to scout them a little bit better. How do you see those guys holding up as we head towards Big East play here?
Yeah, again, obviously the Big East is a different animal, much more physical conference. You're stuffing 20 games into basically 2 months. It's tough. The road trips, hostile environments. I think Alex was going to help. Alex is when Samson Johnson returns, which hopefully for UConn will be within the next 2 or 3 weeks or so. That's what Dan Hurley's kind of hinted at. That's going to give him a little more rest, not as much. Take a little pressure off him. Samson, I would assume Samson will come off the bench and at least to start, backing him up and giving him a little breather, because he's played a lot of minutes for a freshman. And as well as he's played, you can see it's kind of maybe worn on him a little bit last few games, although he played well against LIU. But so I think that's going to help him. And with Donovan, I mean, geez, he's not even playing 20 minutes a game. The season pace for him is so good right now. I have no reason to believe he won't be just as equally effective in the Big East, although, again, certainly maybe, when they hit a grind where they're playing 3 games in the span of 7 days and a couple of road trips, maybe as a freshman he tires out a little bit, but boy, he hasn't shown, that hasn't been too visible yet.
I know you mentioned earlier how you were talking with Bob Hurley Sr. there, and I read the article, and one thing that was interesting to me is he really was hyping up Samson Johnson and how big his return was going to be to this team. I know UConn fans haven't gotten to see a ton of Samson Johnson action. I mean, he got hurt after the opener, played kind of sparing minutes last year. What impact do you think he's going to have on this team when he does come back? Because it seems like there's been a lot of hype and praise thrown his way.
Yeah, really, I haven't seen him play a whole lot either. I mean, we don't get into practices, and obviously he didn't play a whole lot last year, and certainly we didn't get into the secret scrimmages, although assuming they actually happened. But according to Dan Hurley, he was one of the better players in one of those scrimmages, if I'm not mistaken. I think against Harvard. I think you're just going to see a long, athletic kid who's rim protector, a guy who can score on lob dunks, score inside, and knock down a three every now and then. And probably is a little, I think we saw a little bit in some of the preseason stuff. Still a little bit, I don't know what the word is, rusty or just sometimes it seems like he's a little bit, lost out there. So that's the
Mm-hmm.
harsh word, but I think the more playing time he gets, the more experience he gets, he'll be a nice contributor for UConn as well.
As you compare this team to last year's team, I know a lot of different pieces here, but what would you say is the biggest difference when you look at this team compared to last year?
I mean, the way the offense looks, it's just running so smoothly and beautifully. Obviously, the shooting is better. Um, the depth, that's really probably it. The depth. I mean, so many different guys have contributed, will contribute. You could, at any given night, any guy, there's seven,
Yeah.
eight, nine different guys who you could imagine being the leading scorer. And um, already we've seen, the MVP of the Phil Knight Invitational was the backup center.
Yeah.
He didn't even start. He didn't even play much more than about 15, 17 minutes a game. And he was the MVP for the team. Jordan Hawkins didn't play very well in a couple of those games. Adama had a bad game. So other guys have stepped up. That's the difference because last year, a lot of it hinged on RJ Cole and Adama um, and Tyrese Martin is kind of a big three sort of there.
Yeah.
And if those guys had a bad night, or even if like two of them had a bad night, you could be in trouble. But again, you look at the Iowa State game, uh, they got, I think, a total of 4 points from Jordan Hawkins and Adama Sanogo, and they blew out Iowa State
Yeah.
by 15, 18 points. So the depth is remarkable.
One of the things that's most impressive to me about this year's team is it seems like they go on like a 15-0 run every game. It's like at some point they just wear these opponents down. What are you seeing from this team that they're able to just put these runs together and kind of put teams away relatively early on in these games, just kind of deliver a knockout punch?
Yeah, a lot of it's keyed off the defense too. Andre Jackson is just unbelievable. I mean, I don't even know how you describe him as a player. He's just so unique. His defensive pressure, his defensive effort, his leadership, kind of sparks everything. Certainly, the rim protection of Donovan Clingan and to a lesser extent Sonogo, and those guys. Those guys can, it just again the skill level on offense, the athleticism, the ability to get out and run. There's so much. They have so much going for them. So that's why they're able to go on these runs. And again, Adama comes out, they don't miss a beat with Klingon. Even Jordan Hawkins comes out, and Joey Calcaterra could pick up the slack. So that's why they've been able to go out on these runs and sustain and end up with these double-digit victories.
How do you think this team is handling some of the pressure that comes with, being a top five team in the country? It seems like, in the past, they've really fed off of being an underdog, but now they're in a different spot where the target's going to be on their back every single game.
Yeah, well, there's Dan Hurley still managing to use the underdog card a little bit. He's basically said nobody voted for them preseason top 25. Well, true, they were not in the AP top 25. They're, I think, quote unquote 27th, two spots out. But it's not like there weren't a lot of voters, myself included, who didn't vote for them. We did vote for them, and however, whatever he meant by that, yes, they were not in the AP or the USA Today coaches
Yeah.
poll preseason. So um, I'd have more of a chip on my shoulder for being picked fourth in the Big East. I mean, if you
Yeah.
look at that now, how silly that looks. So they maintain that sort of chip on the shoulder. I'm sure they probably think they should be number one this week, even though they're number three. Um, Whatever it takes, and certainly, but I think he'll also drill in the fact that, like you said, they're going to have a target on their back. Every team, every Big East team arena they go into this year, it's going to be that team's Super Bowl, more or less.
Yeah.
So it starts with Butler on Saturday, and I would expect it to be a pretty good crowd there, a good basketball town, and it'll be a harsh environment. A lot harsher than Florida. Florida was the only true road game, and it was a pretty decent crowd, but that's a football school. I mean, these
Yeah.
basketball schools, it's going to be a different environment in some of these arenas.
Absolutely. When you look at the Big East this year, I know it's gotten off to a bit of a rough start in the non-conference. Villanova isn't what Villanova usually is. You look at Creighton, who got off to such a great start, is now in a bit of a funk. What are your thoughts on this conference heading into the start of conference play?
I'm shocked by Creighton. I really thought they were going to be a great team this year. Obviously, there's plenty of time to turn it around.
Yeah.
They lost to some very good teams early, and then Ryan Calpern has been out the last couple of games, but to lose 5 in a row for a team like that is pretty inexcusable. I do think they'll turn it around because they have a lot of talent and because Greg McDermott's a very good coach. But right now, I mean, they play Marquette on Friday, and they could be a 500 team by the weekend. It's incredible to think that. Marquette is a little bit of a surprise to me. I didn't expect a whole lot from him this year, but Shaka Smart's a good coach, and that style of play can be very effective. I think Xavier is a good team, a really good team, really good starting five, much better coach this year too, and Sean Miller, who just received a little new life today. And who am I forgetting? Now Villanova is interesting. I watched them play the other day, and they looked better. Their offense looked a little more like a Jay Wright team. And obviously, having Cam Whitmore, the fantastic freshman, back has helped. They've won all 3 games with him. I would expect them to obviously play better as the season progresses. And then your St. John's, your Providences, your Seton Halls. Who am I forgetting? Those teams. Butler will be interesting. Butler will be interesting. There's a lot of solid teams, but right now there's only one great team, and that's UConn.
I agree with you wholeheartely there. I want to ask a little bit, as you're an AP top 25 voter, I feel like that's become UConn Twitter and social media's latest pastime, has been looking at everyone's ballot and seeing where everyone's ranking UConn and how they fall there. What are your thoughts as you look at some of these ballots that come in? I mean, clearly some voters, it seems like, don't necessarily pay the right amount of attention as you would expect someone who's an AP top 25 voter to do. They'll put Alabama above UConn when UConn beat up on Alabama. How do you view this system? And do you think it's still being executed the right way?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, well, first of all, one thing I hear a lot of people say is that these guys don't watch the games. Well, it's impossible to watch every game.
Yeah.
I mean, for me personally, I'm covering UConn games while all the games are going on. You can't watch every game. You can obviously pay attention to the results, which I certainly do, and which I think the majority of voters do. Sometimes people, it's a thing where you click on different, you type in the name, like someone voted for Mississippi Valley State this week by mistake.
Yeah.
You start typing it in on this website, and Mississippi Valley State might pop up instead of Mississippi State. And it's a mistake that could be made. I mean, it shouldn't be made. You should be not a sloppy. I'm not trying to make excuses for people who make these type of mistakes, but there's a human element to it too.
For sure.
Someone who ranks Alabama above UConn, it's hard to. If that person knew that Alabama had beat UConn, I don't know how you excuse it. But again, maybe they weren't paying attention. Maybe they just looked at Alabama having defeated 2 number 1 teams this year, and looked at it that way. It's just, I struggle with people. There's some people. Well, I know there's one particular writer who's felt bullied. He sent an email out to the other writers that he's felt bullied enough that he's no longer going to vote. I just think sometimes fans take it too much. Someone puts out a bad ballot. Who cares, really? It's not the end of the world if your team is one or 2 spots lower than you think they should be. But by the same token, some writers absolutely have to value the process more and pay more attention to what's going on and make sure they don't make egregious mistakes. Like I would say, ranking Alabama above UConn is an egregious mistake that a few voters did make this week.
I'm curious, as a UConn beat writer and someone who gets the opportunity to vote in the AP Top 25 poll, do you ever feel like you have to, I don't want to say downplay UConn a little bit, but is there some pressure to, maybe not put them number one, where you're going to get people coming after you being like, oh, you're a UConn homer, you cover them, you put them number one. So from a writer's perspective, is there some of that pressure there to maybe underplay, or maybe some voters overplay their teams a little bit that they cover? But just curious how that dynamic works.
Yeah, this was a real tough week for me. I had UConn third last week. Behind, I had Virginia number one and Purdue number two. And if you looked at the resumes, I think it was fair to those were fair. They could have been in any order, but I think that was a fair order right there. Then this week happens, UConn with a very impressive road win at Florida. Virginia barely gets by James Madison at home.
Yeah,
I hate jumping a team or dropping a team that did its job and won a game over the week or won two games, because even if they're an ugly win, even if they're not overly attractive, they did their job. They won the game, did what they were supposed to do. That said, just the sum total of what I've seen from UConn all year compared to Virginia's last couple of games weren't that great. I decided to jump UConn over Virginia. I just stopped a little short of jumping over Purdue, because Purdue, they have 5 quad one wins. They've beat Duke and Gonzaga on neutral courts, and I think Duke and Gonzaga are still good, even though some people might think they're a little overrated. I do think Duke is a very good team. They beat Marquette. They beat West Virginia, who's a pretty good team too. They've got a very good resume. Look, could UConn beat Purdue right now if they played? Absolutely. I wouldn't guarantee it, but there's no question that there's a possibility they could beat them and beat them big. But I just felt uncomfortable jumping them over Purdue this week, and so I put them 2 and put Purdue 1. Yeah, there's pressure. You don't want to be a homer. By the same token, you want to be fair. It was tricky, I will admit. It was tricky this week. I definitely could have put UConn number 1 and not felt guilty about it at all, because they've played great this year.
Yeah, agree. And just interesting to get your perspective there on that, because I know that's been a hot topic among UConn fans the past few weeks as UConn has started to climb in the rankings there.
Well, so let me just say this too regarding UConn fans. Like a few years ago, one of the early, like the second week of the season, I think I was the only voter not to vote Kentucky number 1 week. Literally the only voter, and I didn't think that they had done anything like to be so near unanimous, but so I got it from Kentucky fans on Twitter. They were all over me. They were practically doxing me, and I hate to see that happen to other voters. But so UConn fans, I guess what I would say is, if you don't want to be compared to Kentucky fans, ease up on some of these other voters, because nobody's perfect, and sometimes it's just someone's opinion that they disagree with, but it's a valid opinion in some cases.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the messaging there.
Don't be like Kentucky fans. That's what I'm saying.
As we I'll wrap with this one. As we head towards Big East play here, which Big East matchup are you most looking forward to seeing UConn play?
I would say I'm still interested in Creighton. Mm-hmm. Like I said, I think they're going to turn it around. Dan Hurley hasn't beat Creighton yet as a head coach. He's 0-5 against them. He did beat him at URI, but in the NCAA tournament. But January 7th at Gampel, it's going to be a great environment. Hopefully Creighton's not like 5-7 at the time, but they're 6-8 or whatever. I'm excited to see Xavier. New Year's Day Eve, UConn plays at Xavier. That's going to be interesting. That's going to be a rowdy crowd. I'll tell you what, I might be most looking forward to seeing them play at Providence, because we've been the last 2 years we haven't seen that.
We haven't gotten to,
Last year the game was canceled. The year before it was no fans, and it was at Alumni Hall on campus, Providence campus. Just to see that crowd, which is notoriously rowdy. They probably don't like Hurley much anyway, because for his URI ties, and they certainly don't like UConn. It's going to be a sellout. I don't think Providence is the greatest team this year, but I think they'll get up for that game, and I think it'll be one of those games where it'll be a real challenge for UConn to see how they handle that type of environment. So I might almost say that might be the game I'm looking forward to the most.
No, I think that makes You got a case for that one. I think good answer there. So as always, Dave, I really appreciate the time. Thanks so much for coming on at this kind of the midway. Not sure exactly the midway point, but as we head towards conference play. So I appreciate the time and look forward to seeing the rest of your coverage out there this season.
Great, Jared. Good to be here. Thanks a lot.
Yep, thank you. Next up for UConn is a battle against Georgetown, and joining me today, he was on the podcast last year to help us break down Georgetown. It's Patrick Stevens. So, Patrick, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, I know last year we talked, Georgetown wasn't that great. I'm not sure what people were necessarily expecting out of this team heading into the season, but that's where I want to start with you. Based on what you know of this program and how they've played so far to this point, are they at what you expected to be, worse than what you expected them to be, or maybe somehow better than you thought they'd be?
They're about what I thought they would be, which is a little bit better than last year. Like you can find different spots where they're better and different spots and they're worse, but the overall level of talent to this team, the ceiling for this team is higher. That doesn't mean it's high, mind you, but I can't imagine. I shouldn't say I can't imagine because I watched a lot of last season, but it would be hard for this team to find a way to go winless in Big East play like last year. There's just a little bit more ability. There's more scoring punch, even if there isn't as much prowess on the perimeter 3-point wise. They do have Kudus Wahab back, who, for whatever shortcomings he has as a player at the defensive end, gives them a legitimate interior option that they can look to try to get some buckets in the paint. So I don't think this is a team that's going to go 0-20 in the Big East. I also don't think it's a team that's going to go 10-10 in the Big East either. I mean, it's somewhere in the middle there, and we can get into that, I guess.
When you look at this team so far in the games they've struggled with against some higher level competition, what's been the biggest issue for this team?
Defense, as it has been for quite some time. And you look at the game on Friday against Xavier, their conference opener, they gave up 102.
Yeah.
And it was 102 and I think 75, 76 possessions. I think Xavier was at 1.5 points a trip in the second half. There's can't defend, which was what happened a lot of last year. They just didn't have the guys that would be able to play at that level. And then there's won't defend, which is kind of what we saw a fair bit on Friday night. It was just a team that showed very little interest in doing anything to stop Xavier. And even when Xavier would go through like 2 or 3 possessions and maybe not do what they were supposed to do, and Georgetown would uncork an 8-0 run, I think they got within like 77, 73. There was always a sense, I think for just about everybody in the building, oh yeah, Xavier can score when they want to. And they went out and did that. And so for Georgetown, I think there's going to be a game or two this season where they just can simply outscore a decent team, and certainly can probably outscore some of the teams in the bottom half of the Big East. But against a good team, they just do not have the commitment on the defensive end at this point anyway to be able to do much of anything. And unless that changes, there's going to be some really, really ugly games for this team as the season goes on. Think about the Syracuse game that they played a week or so ago. They got out to a 17-6 lead and then got outscored by 30 the rest of the way and lost by 19. So, I mean, that final score says it's 19, right? It was like 82-63. And you're like, well, that's not good. Well, when you think about it, is they started off well and then just couldn't do anything to stop Syracuse. And that's not a vintage Syracuse team by any stretch of the imagination either. They're just not a great team on that front. You look at their opener. They played Coppin State, a team that does have a good backcourt, but was also a little more than 24 hours removed from its opener. They had bust from Charlotte to D.C. overnight, and I think that was 82 at the end of regulation. The final was 99-89 in overtime. But right from the get-go, just a team that has not shown a whole lot of interest in defending. There's certainly some things that you can look at and say, well, there have been points where maybe they didn't have certain guys. Brandon Murray was out a couple games, this, that, and the other. But in general, when you look at the big picture and you look at what this thing has looked like here over the last 4 or 5 or 6 years, the defense is the common theme for what ails Georgetown.
And I think what's interesting about that too is it, kind of goes regardless of who they're playing. Yes, the tougher teams are going to be able to beat up and exploit that defense, but you're seeing lower level teams like I don't know, American, UMBC, like those teams have given them all runs for their money, and I'm guessing it all starts with that lack of defense there.
It entirely does. And I will say that I've seen enough of American already this year too. That's a much better version of American than what we've seen. And UMBC is actually a team that doesn't do much defense either, particularly on the perimeter. Like they're willing to play those 80 to 75 type of games as well. But forget the mid-major knowledge from down here. I mean, the reality is that quite frankly, you have these mid-major guards or Big East guards or whoever, and they come in, and it's time to feast. It's time to get yours and then some. So. And frankly, there's no reason, you could sit there and try to be diplomatic about it, but the reality is that's essentially what the track record has been, and it's certainly been that way this year. But I will acknowledge that the last game in particular was about as bad as we've seen them play defense this season. But there have also been stretches where they haven't played well. They were, a month ago, they were up 20 on LaSalle and blew that lead and survived. They led Northwestern at halftime and lost by 12. I mean, they've had these stretches where the defense just disappears, and all of a sudden they're looking up, and it's a 12-point game, and the game's basically over at that
stage. I know you've been doing this for a while. Did you ever think there'd be a point where Georgetown, in the program in general, was breathing a sigh of relief for beating Siena?
Probably not. Although there have certainly been some moments here over the last, even stretching back to the tail end of the JT3 era, where there were some dicey games. They lost to Radford. They've had some of these, but at least under that in the JT3 era, they tended to play at a slower pace, which meant that they could control teams, but they also kind of invited teams to stick around. They were not out of games pretty much ever, but it was hard to put teams away. When you play fewer possessions, that's what happens. This team, they just simply, given the fact that they went the last 21 games, I think it was last season, without winning, and the fact that they're sitting here right now having lost 21 in a row to Big East opponents, having lost 26 in a row to power conference opponents. Every game is fair game. Like, I mean, really, from the jump last season when they lost their opener to Dartmouth, it was like every game, it's open season, and they lose to American this year at home. Granted, that was probably not really a home game in the sense that it was an 11:30 a.m. tip the day before Thanksgiving, and you could hear everything that Patrick Ewing yelled out from across the court. There were so few people in the building. But everything, non-conference wise, pretty much from that American game on, you're thinking it's possible. Like UMBC's not bad. Siena's a decent Metro Atlantic team. So I would have to say that it's kind of sobering to think about this for Georgetown, that all these games are very, very much in play, and now it's obviously Big East play from here on out. And simply getting one is a victory in and of itself, given how last year unfolded.
So help us break down this Georgetown roster a little bit. So UConn fans, tuning in, maybe seeing this Georgetown team for the first time, some guys to be on the lookout for. I know everyone up here is very familiar with a Cook, and I know he'll get a nice reception when he's back here on Tuesday night.
Well, you look in the backcourt. First of all, right now they're starting 5 guys that all played elsewhere last season. You have a Cook, obviously played at Connecticut, and he had a couple really decent games early in the season. He looked like a guy, quite frankly, who knew what he was doing. He's obviously a guy that probably has a few limitations to his game, but you could tell that he was a really smart player, and he hasn't been quite as sharp over the last couple of weeks or so. You've got Qudus Wahab, who had started his career at Georgetown, transferred to Maryland, was part of basically a transfer portal fix that did not fix anything, and winds up back at Georgetown, where his limitations are kind of hidden a little bit better. Not a great defensive player, but a solid low post player. So That's what they've got. They, at the very least, they're a more efficient team from 2-point range thanks to having him. They got Brandon Murray, the LSU transfer, who followed former LSU assistant and current Georgetown assistant Kevin Nickelberry. And he's probably, I would say he's their best player at this stage. Not always their top scorer, but probably the guy that combines skill and awareness of his own. If he's having a bad day, he's not going to force things as much as maybe some other guys. They got Jay Heath, who's on his third school, Boston College, Arizona State, and now Georgetown. A weird little stat: he managed to absorb a loss to Syracuse at all 3 stops. I think it was. I think they played Arizona. I think Arizona State played Syracuse. It was. BC obviously definitely did.
Yeah.
So, and then Primo Spears, the Duquesne transfer, is currently leading them in scoring. A guy that has the ability to put up 30 on a given night, but that kind of comes and goes at times. So, and backup wise, on the bench, they've got a few freshmen. Azuero and Anglin are a couple guys that I think can be part of a if we're sitting here imagining like when the next good Georgetown team is, it's probably a couple years down the road, and maybe they're part of it. Wayne Bristol Jr. is a Howard transfer who saw a little bit more playing time earlier in the season, and then Bryson Mazzone began his career at USC Upstate and is playing as a grad transfer. There have certainly been some questions as to how willing Ewing is to go into his bench. The other night they actually used the reserves a little bit more than what they had been. And I'm kind of looking at the box score now. It was about 30 or 48 minutes or so of bench time. But there have certainly been some games like when you're looking up and Primo Spears and Brandon Murray are playing 37, 38 minutes against Siena, like you mentioned. That's one of those that you think, well, that can't hold up very well over the course of a full season. And Ewing's retort to that is, well, they want to be in the NBA, and I played, however many minutes a game when I was in the NBA. And, the obvious retort to that is, well, you're a Hall of Fame player. And, these guys haven't quite gotten to that level yet. But I do think that it would be better for them if those guys were playing more like 32 minutes and being sharper at the end of games. But I'm not the coach. So I think ultimately what you're looking at there is certainly those 2 guys, Spears, Murray, Jay Heath. You're going to see them take the bulk of the shots on Tuesday night, and Wahhab's going to be the center of attention in the West.
Yeah, and just give a little quick shout out to Primo Spears, another Connecticut guy from Windsor here. So I always like to call out the local guys when they're coming here. I'm curious if Georgetown is going to have a chance here of giving UConn, a run for their money a bit on Tuesday night. How is it that Georgetown stays and, has a chance in this game?
They don't turn the ball over, and UConn misses a bunch of threes. And UConn, they almost at this point against a high level team need that team to be thinking about like something else, just going, oh, well, they're not going to be an issue at all. They've had moments like they'll play decent stretches and then they'll just kind of fizzle. And so I don't think that what we've seen from them as much as anything is anything close to a 40-minute. And so if you simply hang around with them for a while, chances are there's going to be about a 5-minute stretch where things go sideways. And that's kind of where they're at right now. But you look at them, they're not as good an outside shooting team as they were last year. And it's kind of scary to go through and think, well, they weren't as good as what they were last year and kind of articulate that and think about it. But they are a better interior team. So I would say that if Wahhab can get going, that's probably going to be a good sign for them. But I think some of it too is just going to be the other team's got to miss shots.
Yeah.
I mean, the other team's got to turn it over. This is not a team based on what we've seen over the last 2 seasons, 1 season and I guess a third at this point. There's no reason to think that they're just going to go out and seize games of their own accord. They're going to need some help to do it. And, I think if Connecticut plays, an A or B game, it's not really going to be particularly close.
Yeah. I'm curious just to dive a little bit more into the overall picture of things here at Georgetown, because Georgetown's an important piece of the Big East. You think back on the history of the conference and the role that they've played. And, just from afar, it's kind of sad to see right now the state of things there where, they're giving everyone in DC free tickets to come out to games. the crowds are pretty light there. And just to kind of see them down in the dumps a little bit with no real necessarily seeing signs of them on the upswing. What's the thought in the area of Georgetown right now? And are they just not taking basketball seriously right now, or how are you viewing it?
That's a very, very good question. And you touched on a phrase there. Are they taking it seriously? I think behind the scenes they think they I don't think it's a matter of, well, Georgetown doesn't care. I think Georgetown does care. I just don't know if Georgetown knows how to get from point A to point B. I mean, I would tell you locally, when you look up and you're seeing announced attendance numbers of 3,000 or whatever, they announced 5,700 and change the other day against Xavier, but they're not particularly relevant locally. I mean, they're when you go 6-25, who's interested? Like, I mean, I don't care if you're Georgetown or if you're whoever, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, let's take a couple other teams that aren't playing very well right now. Like, is Cal relevant in the Bay Area right now? Probably not, right?
Yeah.
You know, is Minnesota relevant in the Twin Cities right now? Not really. You got to win. You got to win to some extent. And it obviously is made worse by the fact that you're playing in an arena that seats 20,000.
Yeah.
And it looks worse, right? Like somebody asked me the other night, like, if you ever covered a team that struggles to draw like this? I said, well, you got to understand, like think about this proportional. Like if you have a 2,000 seat arena, then, you know, when you're drawing 4,000 in a 20,000 seat arena, that's like getting 400 in a 2,000 seat arena. And it doesn't look as bad in a 2,000 seat arena because, okay, it's just not as big. But at the moment, like there just isn't any buzz behind this team at all. And when you go 6-25, and when you've been largely absent from the national scene now for pushing a decade. I mean, they had the Big East tournament run in 2021 and were able to get in there. But besides that, it's been pretty much an irrelevant program from a national perspective since 2015. They were a 4 seed that year. But since then, there hasn't been much to show for it. And when you lose that much for that long, and obviously the losing last year was more significant than at any other point. But when you're just slogging along around 500 or so, it's a tough sell. I mean, you could sit there and I love it how when people complain about, oh, well, the marketing team needs to do better. No, like the actual team needs to do better. Like that's the problem. Like, you know, you don't have people engaged because they know they're going to go out and see a team that isn't really headed anywhere. And you know, the team last year obviously went nowhere. And you would have thought there would have been like a post-pandemic bump, like people just excited to get out and do that. It really didn't happen. And this team, like I said, there is more talent on this team than the one that they had last year. And they're going to win a few games in the Big East. But there's very little from the first 5-6 weeks of the season that suggests this is a team that is prepared to go on some sort of a substantial run over the next 19 games.
Yeah, I'll wrap with this one. And it kind of goes off what we were just talking about. But do you think this program and at least this team, has hit rock bottom and is on the upswing, or is there any ground lower that they could hit?
Competitively, I'm not sure it gets much worse than what last year was. Because by the time they got, I'd say, to late January, like none of the games mattered. The question was, do they win one?
Yeah.
And I don't think that question is going to exist too deep into the conference season. Doesn't mean it won't, but I think that they'll pick up, like I said, 3, 4, 5. You know, pick your number there that isn't 10, but it'll be a sub 500 team in the league. That they've got enough guys that can score that they'll probably just outscore a few teams along the way. I think it would be hard for them to be worse than what they were last year. But when you stack, let's say 5-15 or 6-14 on top of that, and you're sitting there and you're struggling to you're going to be under 500 in all likelihood. You know, that doesn't exactly move the needle. You're better, but is anybody really interested or getting excited about that at that point? Especially, I mean, you basically look at it, they overhauled the roster. It was 8 transfers. And, you know, you kind of size that up and say, okay, so you have a new team and it's a little bit better, but it's not going to be playing meaningful basketball in March. So, you know, does it really matter? And when we go back and stack everything up with the last 6, 7, 8 years. It's been a while. So, do I think that they're going to be much worse than they were last year? No, that was pretty painful to watch. But I don't think that there's a suggestion that things are dramatically better at this point. They've got, let's put it this way: the benefit of the doubt is gone, and they have to go and prove it that they're better than basically what we've been talking about here for the last 15 minutes or so. Like, based on the evidence, and right now they're sitting there at 5-7. And there's, you're surviving teams like Coppin State and Siena, and you've lost at home to American, and you lost to Loyola Marymount. Like, you got a lot to prove. And until they do, you're still the team that went 6-25 last year. So rock bottom, I think that was probably last year. But I'm not sure that the ceiling is particularly high at this point for the short term.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to look at it there. But Patrick, I really appreciate the time and coming on and helping break down this game. And I think for everyone's sake in the conference, it's only a better conference when Georgetown's playing at a higher level. And it could start Wednesday after the UConn game. But Patrick, appreciate the time and thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.